Hey guys, Stephanie with the Northern Gardener here. Today I'm going to talk to you about beets. Beets are super healthy for you. It's probably why you haven't eaten beets before. But now you're a gardener and you know things about fall gardening, such as beets are cold tolerant vegetables and they grow quickly, as in they'll grow and mature quickly enough before frost consistently starts setting in. Other great things about beets are that they're full of natural color and therefore nutrients, such as B vitamins, especially folate, magnesium, which a lot of women are deficient in, shameless health plug, iron, and magnesium. There are a ton of different varieties of beets, such as red, Detroit dark red beets. We have purple, white, gold, and striped beets. Other varieties include bull's blood, which is purple, the avalanche and white Detroit, as well as a golden Detroit, and then I think it's called Chioggia, but that's the striped beet. I'll put a picture here below. You may also see something called 5-colored beets, for example, and that is not a one magical rainbow blend of beets. It's just a variety of, for example, the few beet different colors that I went to, just all like stored in the same seed packet with combinations of other varieties. So for example, the Eden brothers, their rainbow mix contains Detroit dark red, which is a dark red beet, the golden Detroit, which is a yellow beet, a white albino, which is a white beet, and then the Chioggia, which is the striped beet. So if for some odd reason they didn't have a good mixing process when they put the seeds in your packet, you could end up with all Detroit dark red in one Chioggia. So I was honestly today years old when I found that out. I was a little upset because I love getting a mix of variety. I'm not sure what's gonna grow. Even in my purple pepper video, those are rainbow bell pepper seeds, and I swear I thought from the same vine that I was going to get a white pepper and a purple pepper and a yellow pepper. That is not the case. So I was right now years old when I figured that out, and you're not alone if you are too. So there are a ton of different varieties of beets with Detroit in the name, and being from Michigan and Southeast Michigan, I had to figure out why. And what I found was that although Detroit dark red beets were first cultivated by a guy named Mr. Reeves of actually Ontario, Canada in 1892, in that same year, DM Ferry Seed Co., a seed company in Detroit, selected that beet for improvements, and they sold it massively out of that Ferry Seed Co. in Detroit back in 1892. So apparently Detroit used to be somewhat of a seed hub back then, and that's why we'll find that seed company started taking different seeds from beets, and they just rebranded it essentially. So that is why we will find so many beets named after Detroit. So I haven't grown a full beet yet. I'm in the process of growing Detroit dark red, and eventually I'd like to grow avalanche beets. Just try another color out, and maybe even the bull's blood, because they have purple greens on top that come out. So I guess they'd be called purples, but I don't think people call them that. Generally, it takes about an average of 60 days for the beets to get to maturity, but only about 35 for the greens to get to maturity. Here are the beets. They're coming in nicely, along with my carrots here. And this mystery plant, here that is budding. I'm really not sure what it is. But let's talk about how to plant beets. You can plant them from seed or by transplant. Either one works. By seed is quite easy though. I just direct sowed these, covered them a little bit with some compost, and here they are growing. No problem. Similar to onions, it really depends on your variety for proper spacing and how big your bulb or the top of the beet should get. I'd start with about 1 to 2 inches apart with the usual 1/4 inch depth. Here I don't have very clean planting rows, as you can tell. That's because some of the seeds germinated and some of them did not. You should thin your seedlings until they're about 4 inches apart if you want to grow the optimal and maximum size of your beets. You know, M.I. Gardner would probably, or has actually promoted high intensity gardening, which is, in other words, is no spacing or very little spacing. But this isn't really best practice. You know, if you have a beet growing next to another beet, they both can't reach their maximum potential. But if you're okay with smaller beets, or you're just growing the beets for their greens, then by all means. Another thing, if you use high intensity gardening, this might invite pests just because there's a lack of airflow because the vegetables are so tightly packed in one area. But I encourage you to go check out his video and to check it out for yourself. Beets prefer a loose soil. Otherwise, you can end up with funky looking roots. Also, really quick, let me mention, beetroot is a beet. Essentially, you have the root is what you eat, and then the greens on top is also what you eat. But the beetroot is the, bright red, teardrop shaped kind of vegetable that we're talking about. Some people just call them beets, some people call them beetroots, but they're the same. Either way, they prefer a loose soil, just like carrots. Otherwise, you can end up with funky shaped root vegetables. So another thing to do is to keep the soil moist. They really prefer a moist soil. Otherwise, your roots can crack, and this will kind of make them dry out, make them a little gross. Another thing, beets love nitrogen. It's great for their root development, and it allows them to be prolific and just really high functioning, high yield beets is nitrogen rich, loose, moist soil. Like I had mentioned earlier, beets love the cooler temperatures. They are certainly a cold tolerant and cold hardy vegetable that is excellent for a spring or fall garden. I don't know if you can see, but Tank's over here trying to get some scratches. And so I would highly suggest planting beets in the earlier spring or in the fall. Seeds may not germinate if it's too hot. That's what makes them an excellent cold tolerant vegetable. When to plant beets? Beets should be grown in cooler months, early spring or fall. Seeds might not even germinate in the hotter temperatures. They're definitely a cold hardy, cold loving, cold tolerant vegetable, and that's what makes them so great for your fall garden. How to water? Keep the soil moist, like I said before, otherwise the roots can crack. It's just something that they thrive in. Colder temperatures, moist soil. And also another way to determine whether or not the beets are getting enough water without being drowned is that their greens might wilt. No problem, it's not a sign that they're dying, maybe, probably. They just need a little bit more water. Some common pest diseases and problems is that you might have grubs or cutworms. This is something that can affect any plant in the garden, really. But they're certainly more susceptible to any types of funguses or diseases when the weather gets hotter, because that stresses them out. If you thought that the outside temperature was trending toward cooler, provided you plant them in the fall, but surprise, you have a super hot week and you're worried about your beets because they're cold tolerant, or they like the colder temperatures, as I've said a million times before. One thing that you can do is that you can mulch around your beets or on top of them if you had just planted the seeds. You can mulch with dried pine needles, some chopped up leaves, some compost, all great ideas. And this will not only regulate the soil temperature, but it will also keep the soil, it'll help retain that moisture. Another thing that you can do is put ashes from burnt wood from your fire pit at the base of your plants to prevent some grubs and cutworms. Sorry, I keep looking over there. We actually just had a coyote run through or try to come through the yard, but as my dog was out here earlier with me and he chased it away and came back, and just craziness. How to harvest beets. So you should harvest beets when they're either a golf ball size, that would be considered pretty small, or the size of a baseball, which would be, I think, the optimum size for a beet. This could also be a form of succession planting though, because the way you have beets planted, you could pick one at the size of being a golf ball and then leave the other one to grow larger right next to it. So you could get the smaller beets first and have the larger beets later. You can also cut their greens, so don't forget about that. Grab the lowest part at the soil surface and kind of twist and pull up. You can also do that same motion, the twist and pull, to separate the beetroot from the greens. When you start seeing a thick skin or like a woody looking skin at the top of the beetroot, your beets are certainly ready to pick now, but I would try to pick them just before they get woody. That woody part isn't exactly edible, and if they're overripe, they'll be very hard to bite into whether or not they've been cooked. Beets will keep for months, just like any other root vegetable if stored properly. Just like carrots, beet storage is similar. You want to wipe them off. You want to separate the roots and the greens from the vegetable that you're going to eat. And then you want to allow them to dry out in a cool, dark place. And then you want to store them in an airy container, a container that is away from sunlight and that can allow air to go in and out. So I think like maybe a potato sack type of bag, or a wicker basket with a lid on it, a wood basket with holes in it, etc. So next I'm going to talk to you about companion plants for beets. Onions and garlic are great companion plants for beets because they not only deter pests like aphids, but they also improve the flavor of the beets. Bush beans, they fill the soil with nitrogen and other nutrients, which beets love. Cabbages like kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, they also fill the soil with nutrients, and they actually kind of feed off each other and help each other grow. So that would make cabbages an excellent companion plant. And radishes, they're ready to pick before beets are, and so they actually say that you should plant them within each other, like a beet radish, beet radish, beet radish, and that's when you pick the radish and they kind of loosen up the soil for the beet to then develop even larger in that loose turned soil. Some precautions and lessons learned from beets. Like I said, I'm in progress with the Detroit dark red beets. This is my first time growing beets, but in my research I've found that the most important things are spacing and keeping the soil moist. Those seem to be the two most important tips. Again, with spacing, use at your discretion. If you want perfectly uniform beets, space them apart. If you really couldn't care less and you want a variety of sizes, space them an inch or two apart and they'll be fine. A pro tip, don't forget that you can eat the greens. Similar to spinach, or I want to say kale, which don't seem similar at all, you can eat the beet greens. Beet seeds are actually clumps of seed, and I was a little bit confused by this first, because sometimes you get two seedlings that are right next to each other, although you know that you didn't plant them there. And this is because, unlike other vegetables, beet seeds come in clumps. And so more than one might actually germinate. So that was kind of a cool, fun tip. A lot of my sources came from Grow Veg. Go ahead and watch Self-Sufficient Me. Mark is hilarious with his beet video and his 5 tips. Another source was Harvest to Table, with help about deterring pests and other problems like that. So again, this is Stephanie with The Northern Gardener. Thanks for watching and happy gardening.